All right, we're going to get started with some introductions here while people are still grabbing their food. Thank you all for coming. My name is Chris Green. I'm the Executive Director of the Animal Law and Policy Program here at Harvard Law School. Thank you for coming to our Animal Law Week. We've got a great lineup of speakers again this year. I'm going to turn it over in a sec to Kate, who's going to introduce Carol Adams. But tomorrow we've got Varu Chilakamari from the Department of Justice Animal Welfare Enforcement Team. And then on Wednesday, we've got Pete, an undercover investigator who has worked in many different countries in many different sectors, to talk about his experience. Then on Thursday, we have Kitty Block, who's the president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States and also Humane Society International. And then on Friday, we're having a panel discussion of a group of folks who are thinking about starting a new type of organization to accelerate technological alternatives to animal experimentation. So, and also for those of you here, we're going to have we only have the room for an hour, so we're not going to have time for Q&A today at this session. But at 3:30, we are having a coffee chat upstairs with Carol, and we can use that to sort of accommodate some of the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
Sorry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate. I'm the co-president of our Animal Law Society here. And while I'm up here, I just want to say thank you to the rest of our board members, too, for all their hard work for getting this week going. And a thank you to the WLA, JLG, and HALT for co-sponsoring this event as well. It is such an honor for me to introduce Carol Adams to all of you. Adams is a feminist, vegan writer and social justice activist. She is the author of the groundbreaking book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, now in a 25th anniversary edition, as well as many other books. She has edited several important anthologies on ecofeminism, feminism, and animals. Her articles have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Ms. Magazine, among others. Adams holds a Master's of Divinity from Yale University, and she wrote one of the earliest articles theorizing why abusers harm animals, entitled Women Battering and Harm to Animals, and founded with her spouse a hotline for women experiencing domestic violence in the 1970s. She's been an activist against domestic violence, racism, and homelessness, and for reproductive justice and fair housing practices. Adams' work has also had a profound impact on my own path, both personally and professionally, and so I'm so thrilled that she's here. So please join me in welcoming Carol Adams.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank Harvard Law for having a huge week devoted to this subject. And
Make sure the mic's working because we're recording.
all right.
Yep.
Okay. And thank you for the Animal Law group here at Harvard Law. So, Me Too and the Sexual Politics of Meat. I better begin with a trigger warning. The following presentation contains graphic images, both in the sense of highly sexualized women, depictions of animal suffering, and depictions of animal flesh. This is nothing you haven't seen 1,000 times before, but seeing it in this context with this kind of attention may make it disturbing in a way it has not been before. Traditionally, the human species is conceived as above and better than the rest of nature. We believe there's a fixed species boundary. When one believes this species boundary determines treatment of those on the other side of it, one is said to have an anthropocentric perspective. What is human is most important. This updating of the traditional trope of evolution for a Toshiba laptop from animal to human reminds us that humans so often equals white middle-class man, able-bodied, and therefore anthropocentrism is inevitably androcentric, male-oriented. As many have observed, human became defined as white male property owner, viz. The Constitution, but it's actually more complicated than this. With misogyny, as Kate Mann defines it, systematically, not individually in practice, with misogyny and white supremacy, white women and people of color were defined differently and deemed lesser than those white men. But this conceptualization pushed against the species boundary. And so white women and people of color were associated with the other animals more than with the white male. It was as though we were both human and not human, holding a place within the species boundary but below it as well. Debates about the right to hold people as property, the rights of women, all women to vote, resulted from the influence of species conceptualizations on our status. Are we fully human? Are we subhuman? Are we conveniently animal when mistreatment is key to dominion over us, and conveniently human but without equal rights when sexual access is desired? Because as the historians of the enslavement history of the United States have pointed out, even though black women were characterized as being like animals, the white men raping them knew they weren't. So they were animals and not animals, and we see this over and over again. I'll just point out that the winner of last night's Best Picture at the Oscars participates in this structure, right? Because it's a movie that's focusing on the transformation of the white male by a white male director who is known in the past for having flashed his penis at stars, and that never consulted the family of Dr. Donald Shirley, the Jamaican-American pianist who's also part of the movie. So it's not like this is a typology from the past. It's reiterated in popular culture all the time. Our culture has not overcome these associations. According to an article in Slate during the presidential election of 2016, they used a graphic of the ascent of man, quote unquote. Subjects were asked to rank how evolved they believed blacks and whites were. A full 38% of white subjects rated blacks as less evolved than they rated whites. And this was not just Trump supporters. In Afroism, Sill and Afko write that racism is simultaneously anti-black and anti-animal, as seen by racial ideology's elevation and celebration of the human and humanity, particularly as Western and white. A human-animal binary has always functioned in racist and misogynistic logic. They write, the open acceptance of the negative status of the animal is a tacit acceptance of the hierarchical racial system and white supremacy in general. The negative status of the animal is represented through the idea of animality. We use animality against animals all the time by flattening their diversity into stereotypes, failing to recognize their cognitive abilities, and denying their social nature and needs and social affiliations. One reason animality makes for such a potent resource for social oppression is because all around us is proof of how easy it is to debase the animal, especially in agriculture, but also in entertainment and research. Focusing on how different animals are from us allows us to use them as we want. Even though we often forget it, we humans are animals too. So social oppression benefits from animality. In the language of racists, for instance, US women give birth, but immigrant women drop their babies as though it's instinctual, being animal-like. No humans illegal, we asserted, protesting Trump's immigration ban 2 years ago at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. But patriarchal xenophobic ethics makes the outsider or other the immigrant, not human, through the language that's used about them. Animality is, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, the characteristics or nature of an animal. Note, this is a reminder of Derrida's assertion that the word animal itself commits violence by flattening difference. It's also animals considered as a group, and the animal instincts of humans as distinct from their spiritual nature. We'll return to how figure 3 or how definition 3 works in Me Too in a little while. Last October on Twitter, the Glasgow Women's Library invited requests for images from their files, and I asked for vegetarianism and the suffrage movement. They couldn't find anything immediately, but they posted these 2 images of suffragettes from England. In each case, women speaking out for their rights were associated with animals, specifically reptiles. I love this one. It's such a primal-ish image. I spent time at Harvard Divinity School, so the snake, the viper, the serpent, what woman can speak for herself with a viper as her tongue? Asserting woman's animality was an attempt to keep her from full citizen rights as human equaled male suffrage. And here's another reptile unable to speak for herself. So in these kind of situations, animal is the negation of the human. animality a weapon used by human supremacy to impact disenfranchised humans. So social oppression needs animal oppression. One aspect of animality used to justify social oppression is that animal-like bodies are unruly, but they're manageable. So this famous picture from the second wave, I finally saw it in Los Angeles. I had no idea it was really that big. It was first reproduced in the New York Times, and I stood in front of it and thought, yeah, our body is still a battleground. Misogyny uses species differentiation as an intensifier, and species oppression relies on misogyny. Thus, in the terms of my work at Sexual Politics of Meat, we've ended up with animalized and sexualized women and feminized and sexualized animals. But the borders between them are sometimes very, very faint. It's like, who are you talking about? For instance, this is from Italy. When feminists protested this image, they took it down. When feminists protest images like this in the United States, that only makes them more popular. Here's a recent one I was sent. A sexualized deer waiting to be tanned and hided. We feminists may be human-oriented in our theory and practice because that is what we have learned and because that is what feminism has argued for so long. From Mary Wollstonecraft forward, the assertion has often been we are human, not animals. We have recognized that there is some sort of line or boundary, and we want to be positioned with the dominant people of our species. This is anthropocentric feminism. But since anthropocentrism is related to a racist androcentrism, white and male-centered, feminism has ended up in that unlikely spot, defending its human focus via male-informed attitudes. In Colored Pictures, Race and Visual Representations, Michael Harris examines racist representations. In one chapter on the racist representations of Black women, he identifies 3 factors influencing dominant representations: patriarchal structures, the white male perspective as universal, for instance, as I would argue in defining who's human or who has the rights of a citizen, and the appropriation of female bodies. This is a European transport truck taking pigs to be slaughtered. This is the feminized animal in the language of the Sexual Politics of Meat. Here is a steakhouse in Brooklyn. This is a cow's head put on top of Titian's Venus painting. This is the animalized woman. Here's another transport truck in Europe. I don't know why there are so many transport trucks in Europe that anthropomorphize animals, but I just got sent some more this week. All 3 illustrate Harris's point about patriarchal structures, the white male perspective as universal, and the appropriation of female bodies. Of course, if you believe this pig wants to be consumed, you're not discomforted by the sign of all the pigs crowded in that truck. The intersection of race, gender, species is always happening. And so this new restaurant, Carolina Smokehouse, through this sexualized pink pig, is figuring whiteness and femaleness in its representations, as many barbecue places do. Thus, we have cultural constructions of animalized, racialized women and feminized, sexualized, and racialized animals. You all with me so far? I know I'm moving fast. I'm just trying to watch the clock. So that brings us to figures of consumption that help to perpetuate these associations, projecting the human male figure as the consumer, not the consumed, and hiding the violence behind it all. So, buns and thighs, seen in LA. It's the wink that's telling us that everything's okay. Seeing her as edible is fine. It's the wink that's, this is an anthropomorphic affirmation of anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism. everyone loves big breasts. Everybody. There's the white male meat-eating perspective as universal. This is a magazine on eating. This is their magazine cover. So it's not like there's just one person out there perpetuating this. This is disseminated through so many different levels of our culture. This is a dead animal who is actually being served the chicken feet in high heels. So you're feminizing the chicken's death. And high heels have been a marker of feminization for a long time. So of course they are incorporated in trying to assuage meat-eating anxiety. Each time it's an animal who's actually being referred to or presented. These anti-Hillary pins were seen at the Republican convention in 2016, but this discussion of her in this way, too fat thighs, too small breasts, they've been around since she was First Lady. That's when I first started being sent images like this. So Western cultures co-constructed meat-eating, masculinity, nationhood, and white supremacy. And it does it by patrolling, it does it in one way today, by patrolling gender diversity.
The most effective cure for male spice loss is new Slim Jim Dare sticks.
New Slim Jim Dare with 3 levels of heat, made from stuff guys need.
So it's always in the postmodern time ironic and not ironic. Like it's making a statement about gender binary and it's trying not to, but it wants the guys to buy those kind of foods. So the Meat and Men Association reaches back, but there were 2 recent instances of remasculizing of white men that included associating their masculinity with eating meat. So you'll find magazines like this all the time, Eat Like a Man. After the Vietnam War, the remasculinization of the United States occurred. And remasculinization happened after the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, with popular culture fascination with male heroes. We learned, for instance, that Giuliani's first meal after 9/11 was meat that sweats. What is meat that sweats? I don't know, but that was back in 2001 when Giuliani just couldn't do anything wrong, ostensibly. Everything he did, and so one of the articles said the first meal he ate was meat that sweats. If part of manhood historically has been connected to the use of animals, then a masculinity made anxious and unsettled seeks to reestablish itself through normative and naturalized acts like meat eating. I mean, what these ads show us is that masculinity is really unstable. It's so unstable, you've got to do it, you've got to eat meat every day to protect your status, which is actually saying the opposite of what you would think they'd say. Why isn't manhood natural? But so this is the newest thing, these anti-vegan tirades, but there's so much masculinity, masculine ego going on. He resigns after joking about killing vegans. Well, sausageness, baconness, manliness. What sort of manliness needs to renew itself every morning at breakfast? Well, I guess this one. This is from Brazil, sent from identified by a Brazil friend that says, "Good morning, hetero men, macho breakfast." The profile name is hetero and proud. I don't know how he eats bacon with a gut. I mean, but there we go. So good, even guys like our salad. This is meta. This is me taking the photo. But got to get meta every once in a while. Anyway, a little misogyny on your salad goes a long way. This month, the manly man had to have Valentine's Day beef jerky, which was sold out, in the form of roses. You can see that this is the anxiety. The manly man is a company, ostensibly for manly men. And then this made the Today Show think of all the things that might be on the Today Show, but putting the man in romance by having meat jerky, you know, like, what is unmanly about fair trade chocolate? If we had looked closely at the ads and seen how normative and widespread these assertions were, perhaps we would have been more prepared for this phenomenon. But one of the things we need to recognize is that white male supremacists echo the attitudes we find in the advertisements, but they aren't the source of it, and they aren't the only ones who believe it. So the bikers at the White House last year, close up, this is what it says on his jacket. We eat meat, we drink beer, and we speak effing English. You know, just to be clear, it's not only Trump followers who are racist and not just right-wing neo-Nazis who equate meat eating and dairy with white identity. But they're like a magnifying glass enlarging normative values about identity, meat eating, masculinity, and whiteness. So the sexual politics of meat is misogyny expressed through meat eating a dead being for pleasure as a man's right and a male right. One of the things that's changed is social media allows regressive views free rein now. In response to a September 2018 interview with me about my new book, Protest Kitchen, which we originally called The Anti-Trump Diet, this was the cover in North Carolina, and a post to Instagram by someone who wants the old Southern ways, code, racist, you know, slaveholding, a justifier of Confederacy. It brought out such a torrent of responses, I couldn't believe it. I mean, they had so much fun hating it. It was like deja vu when Sexual Politics of Meat first came out. The majority of reviewers hated it, like, who did I think I was? But I love this Instagram comment because it illustrates the point I'm making. You attack my rights, and now you're attacking my meat. Get out of here, bitch. You know, it's so reassuring that they know how to spell bitch, but they don't know how to conjugate. Clearly, a conflict about ethical values is going on. So patriarchal ethics defines the rights bearer as autonomous with multiple forms of permissible or tolerated violence, and some lives matter more than others. For instance, the famous one, Spinoza wrote, "It's plain that the law against the slaughtering of animals is founded rather on vain superstition and womanish pity than on sound reason." But he wasn't alone. Caring was devalued. Caring was feminized. So during the last century, especially in the 1950s, caring took on a sentimental aspect and became something for the private sphere, not the public. What evolved was a subtle misogyny. Caring was seen as weak politically. In The Way We Never Were, Stephanie Kuntz observes that emotion and compassion could be disregarded on the political and economic realms only if women were assigned these traits in the personal realm. As individualism and a survival of the fittest ethos spread in society, the family became more and more idealized as the site of altruism and love. As a result, compassion disappeared as an aspect of who we are as politically engaged people. Instead, the assignment of care to the private realm helped to perpetuate and even reward a degree of meanness in politics. So the feminist ethics of care proposes instead that ethics is about relationships, not autonomous individualism. It looks at connections, and it emphasizes the role of empathy and compassion in making ethical decisions. Feminist ethics always has an epistemological aspect to it. In terms of violence, it asks the question, who decided it was okay to do to animals what we do to them? What was the reasoning? Who defends it? What do they know about what they're defending? So epistemology, as McKinnon has pointed out about feminist law, has to be part of our methodology and part of our questioning. And this is the perpetual violence, and is it consonant with feminist ethics? When caring is asserted as an ethical response, such as animals suffer, the reaction often is that we care about animals and we don't care about humans. It's based on the idea that empathy is limited and rationed. I call this retrograde humanism. We are asking whose bodies matter and how do we decide? The retrograde humanism response reminds me of times when actions of self-determination by a victim of sexual exploitation, especially boundary setting, may be met with the declaration, "You don't care about me." One of the manipulations of an abuser, any attention elsewhere is taking away from the abuser. It's a controlling response. The co-sisters tell us animals did not inform our notion of animality. Animality informed our notions of animals. All the stereotypes, the assumptions about animals, is how we perpetuate animality as that thing, the despised other. In the sexual politics of meat, I wrenched a literary term, the absent referent, into political territory by arguing that animals became absent reference in the consumption of meat, dairy, and eggs. What I mean is that with meat eating, they disappear as living beings, then as bodies into fragments, and finally conceptually. If the animals aren't there to be noticed, how do we include them? One result is that with anthropocentric feminism, they've also been absent from our theories. Philosopher Alice Crary argues that philosophers have outsourced the debate about animals from ethics to biology. But hasn't much of feminism done this as well? Many feminists have challenged biology's misogynistic history and precepts about women, but accept its conclusions about animals as givens. So animality offers oppression an alibi, allowing us to exclude any beings deemed animals from moral consideration. In this way, social oppression leverages animality against targeted groups of humans and uses that association to justify their disenfranchisement. Those associated with animality may be made into absent reference. So this is a pig, ostensibly, who looks so woman-like, a beheaded woman for pig-picking barbecue in North Carolina. This is from Amherst College 7 years ago, roasting fat ones since 1847. And because they put the animality on the man, they could just put the woman being roasted. You know, I think this is hate speech. Representing women as meat is misogyny benefiting from speciesism through the absent referent. Then we also have reproductive exploitation on the farm, and there's not time to go into it as much as necessary theoretically, but there could be no meat, dairy, or eggs without continuous sexual exploitation. Farmers keep female animals pregnant until they're killed. The ongoing reproductive exploitation that undergirds animal agriculture requires a misogynistic view of females and of female reproduction. So they're forced to produce what I call feminized protein, because it's vegetable protein put through a female body and becoming dairy and eggs. So a few years ago, people started calling the local police because there were strange noises that they were hearing. And even the headline tells you, strange noises turn out to be cows missing their calves. So when I see the thing that says milk comes from a grieving mother, that's what a grieving mother sounds like. Calves are taken away often within 15 minutes of birth. These are from a photo sequence done by the very talented photojournalist Joanne MacArthur. Oh, see how the other cows are watching? So the calf is taken to live in these little, they're given very different names, but now they're called huts. And even for, you know, a whole pinking thing, they pinked the huts. As though this somehow, you know, for October Breast Cancer Awareness. Anyway, she goes to live by herself. Milk drinking is not seen as a relationship between a cow and a calf, but between a supposedly liberated cow and the consumer. Bitch from hell, an ear tag made by a farmer for her cow who probably is protesting the removal of her calf. For years, we've heard the same myths repeated over and over again defending sexual violence against women. There are stark comparisons to how animal agriculture defends and frames the sexual violation and reproductive coercion in dairy and egg farming. She deserved it. On the farm, she's a bitch from hell. She liked it. On the farm, she needs us to take her milk, and only happy hens lay eggs. Women are the weaker sex. They need protection. On the farm, animals are safe or confined. It protects them from other animals and the elements. If we strip it all away, what are we left with? Sexual coercion and forced pregnancies to produce animal products for a human species conceived of as white and male. So I call animal agriculture and the businesses it spawns in the way they present themselves culturally as the anti-Me Too movement. Advertisements aimed at farmers often deliberately confuse to whom control of reproduction is referring, women or other female animals. Drug companies depict sexy, buxom females who want to be made pregnant, who want to give the farmers more babies each year. If misogyny nests in attitudes about meat consumption, it's given free range in the attitudes of animal agriculture. It's a safe bet that Lisa doesn't want to produce baby pigs on a factory farm. But here she is. Now she's inviting consumption. She wants you to want her. This is an actual ad that was placed on Facebook for an animal agriculture business that was hiring. She wants it. Here's a t-shirt. Stand up and take it like a woman. Take what like a woman? Penetration, killing? Montana, hunting season, open, female students, the prey. Using animals and their dead bodies as substitutes, no, women are the absent reference here, is a milieu in which attacking, hunting, and grabbing both buns and eating it like a man is celebrated. It's crucial to recognize the ways misogyny and rape culture find expression in this milieu in which actual women aren't presented, yet attitudes toward women are the engine for the images. Meat advertisements, by equating women with animals meant for consumption, are channels that preserve sexual assault as both normative and an avenue for joking, especially since meat and dairy and egg require sexual exploitation. The ordinary misogynistic associations are not generally critiqued unless they go just a little too far, like Randy's hardcore hamburgers, which did not last long after selling a Weinstein burger, a casting couch burger, and a fake taxi burger. Talk about identifying with the perpetrator. But chicken galore, if there's a better piece of chicken, the rooster got it. Well, that's normative. And in fact, a chicken can refuse a rooster's advances in the barnyard, but this is not the point being made here. So women's rights to self-determination are undermined by reproductive control of non-human females and a meat-eating discourse that posits that women want that is to be pregnant or dead. The idea that female animals might also possess bodily integrity slips even further from ethical consideration. So we're back to Barbara Kruger's famous artwork. One aspect of the anti-Me Too movement is popularizing of the equation that asking for consumption equals consent in a rape culture. One of the challenges for prosecuting rapists has been that consent is determined from the point of view of the rapist, not the rape victim. And there's a parallel here with meat eating. Meat eaters like to believe their victims have consented to their death, often describing it as a sacrifice made by the animal. Here's a popular internet meme, chicken permission. Sure, go ahead. Chicken is better than that chick who said she will even die for you. Chicken actually die for you. So I call this chalk misogyny because there are ephemeral eruptions throughout the world. Or the store that featured hot chicks need to get laid. These dead females desire their defeat. This desire for death and their own consumption is framed according to traditional assumptions about female sexual desire to be overpowered. They're powerless, yet they want it. They're dead, yet they beckon. They're pieces of meat, and they're meant to be seen as female. Yes, these are cartoonish, unsophisticated, sometimes chalk misogyny, but it doesn't make them innocuous. It exposes how taken for granted these associations are. They have to be cartoon images because animals don't wear clothes, bras, high heels, garters, makeup, etc. So animal oppressors use a specific kind of anthropomorphism to convey the sexual politics of meat, while accusing animal advocates of arguing from anthropocentric and anthropomorphic positions. Talk about asking for it. In the terms of the sexual politics of meat, sexual harassment and exploitation make women absent reference. Women are animalized as their sexual boundaries are violated. The Me Too movement has reminded us the woman as meat trope is still alive. During the Senate hearing last year for whether Brett Kavanaugh should be appointed to the Supreme Court, a New Yorker article included this reminder of women's unequal status. A Yale classmate was quoted as saying, "It was disgusting. They treated women like meat." Wayne Pacelle, the former executive director of the Humane Society of the United States, was in Kavanaugh's class at Yale. This political article had appeared earlier the week that Washington Post article was seen, and it described how Paul Shapiro created a hostile environment at HSUS. One of the sad ironies of the Me Too in the animal rights movement is that sexual exploiters like Pacelle and Shapiro knew what a piece of meat was. Their activism was about stopping using animals as pieces of meat while they continued to view women in this way. This image from a New Bedford burger joint, it was sent to me by Paul Shapiro, who during the same time was creating a hostile environment for women at HSUS. In the animal rights movement, the same patriarchal structures, the same white male perspective is universal, and sadly, the same appropriation of female bodies occurs. Well, only women's, not non-human females. So one major difference between serial sexual exploitation in the animal rights movement and society at large is that women outnumber men by 4 to 1, but are not represented in the same ratio in the leadership. If traditional Western ideas about manhood are linked to oppressive relationships with animals, such as meat eating, hunting, and fishing as contributing to defining masculinity, how did animal rights male leaders, who had obviously rejected those very activities, respond to identity issues arising from a rejection of traditional manhood-defining activities? They could not remasculinize by using meat-eating, dominant male attitudes towards animals, but they could by masculinizing the animal rights movement itself. In leadership, campaign strategies, funding practices, and rationales, including a fetishism of male authority, these developments help to institute misogyny in theory and practice. So, remember the chart from early? Here it is, misogyny in the animal rights movement. It helps us understand what happened. Male, mostly white leaders animalized, sexualized women as subordinates, sexually usable, disposable, and or used to sell the product, like PETA, animal rights. More than 10 years ago in the New York Times Magazine, Wayne announced, "We aren't a bunch of old ladies in tennis shoes." Please note what I'm wearing. "We have cleats on." Isn't he saying little old ladies figured this out first and we are latecomers? A friend drew this for me. Well, anyway, rather than challenge masculine privilege as part of the problem, white men created a bro culture in the animal rights movement. By its logocentric emphasis on becoming the voice for animals or the voice for the voiceless, a very human-centered and ableist notion. Its single-issue focus rather than multi-issue approach. For instance, Wayne and I would be at the same event, and he would talk about how the animal rights movement needs to be more like the NRA, single-issue focused. Sacrificial language urged upon women survivors of sexual exploitation in the animal rights movement, including that they be quiet for the animals. Women did not want to report what happened to them because it was thought to hurt the movement and the animals on whose behalf they were working. The men violating women's boundaries weren't seen as hurting the animal rights movement. It was the women reporting it. Many women thought they would lose their jobs, and many survivors suffering from PTSD withdrew. Exhorting a single-issue approach to animal exploitation shut out feminist and anti-racist analyses. Despite gender plurality in the movement, static images of manhood in key leadership positions centered male leaders, creating over-the-top praise schemes for leaders and proclaiming them rock stars, thereby, I can barely say rock stars, it's so anomalous, thereby diminished both the roles of others in the organization and the obvious role of entire teams that made significant events possible. choosing heroic language for their activism and elevating a savior narrative, and the repeated language from men that they were no longer, the movement was no longer little old ladies in tennis shoes. Sexualizing public spaces like PETA, appealing to the heteronormative male in advertisements, or sexualizing the office place. They also instituted shared living spaces while traveling to save money. Everybody stayed in the same Airbnb. These men were making lots of money, and yet they had to save money by putting men and women in the same Airbnb. Figure that. Standardizing sexual objectification in the animal rights movement by language, images, and treatment. But we also have to recognize how low-paying jobs contributed to bro culture and helped to obscure the extent of violence against women in the movement. Lauren Ornelas, founder of the Food Empowerment Project, explains, the animal rights and vegan movements do not typically pay their employees well, so more often than not, people working in the movement are already more privileged, as they do not have financial issues such as paying off debt, helping their families, etc. So many women of color ended up doing grassroots work, that is, they're volunteers, and they face not only racism doing this work, but also are sexually harassed and even raped. Yet such abuse does not get the same amount of attention as when it happens to those who experience it as part of their paid positions, because there's no Title VII protection, or apparently, I better not say too much, I'm in the law school. Help me understand that. I don't think that the volunteers were protected in the same way. So what does accountability look like? It begins with making sure the survivor is safe and stopping the action that's harmful. I had so many conversations with men in the movement, but what would accountability look like? Which was their way of saying, I really don't want to tell my friend he did wrong. And I said, you know what accountability looks like? It's what we've been trying to do to animal agriculture. That's accountability. Why do you have trouble now when your whole activism has been about accountability? But it would have involved empathy for the victims, the exploiter taking responsibility for naming and telling the truth about what they did. In showing empathy, they needed to acknowledge the harm that's been done through deep and sincere regret for the damage done to the survivor, the organization, and the movement by the actions. Acceptance of full responsibility for causing and rectifying the situation, stopping all behavior that's controlling and sexually exploitative, and acceptance of the consequences for having betrayed one's position within the movement. My God, they don't want to do that. And making restitution. So creating accountability in a diverse movement is a challenge. This is when I tagged Paul Shapiro a year ago in January. Here it was well known what he had done, and yet everybody was supporting him when he had a new book out. So I tagged him. He finally untagged himself about a month later. One of the problems for creating accountability is that HSUS did a terrible job in holding these men accountable. And I do wish Kitty Block much success, but they have to admit the mistakes they made in these men being able to go on to continue to do what they're doing. And you won't be able to read it, but here you can just Google Carol Adams. Here I helped Wayne Picelli with his resignation letter. And you can read how I tried to do what feminists do, which is to correct the obfuscation and denial. It's on my website. We also have to acknowledge that many of the supporters have been white women. Erica Brunson was quoted in the New York Times about what red-blooded man didn't do this. And Deborah Wilson, a vigilant supporter of Picelli, criticized our attempts to hold men accountable and suggested a man's life could be ruined because he made a pass at me. Needless to say, such minimizing language ignores that this behavior was destroying women's lives and pushing them out of the movement. And vegans who might have helped hold these men accountable instead went out for turmeric tea with them. As Judith Herman explains, it's very tempting to take the side of the perpetrator. All the perpetrator asks is that the bystander do nothing. He appeals to the universal desire to see, hear, and speak no evil. The victim, on the other hand, asks the bystander to share the burden of pain. The victim demands action, engagement, and remembering. Joyful Vegan says, compassion doesn't condone bad behavior. It helps transcend it, which really doesn't make any sense. Transcend what? Compassion for the abuser would say, I care enough about you to hold you accountable for what you did. There's nothing to transcend. Perhaps there was also the fear of being excluded from the perks that aligning with bro culture could bring. With the framing of the animal rights movement as needing men's leadership and the accompanying valorization of heroes rather than grassroots activists, a reversal of culpability evolved. It was women speaking about their experience that was hurting the movement rather than the men who chose to rape, sexually abuse, or harass women in the movement and then called their accusers liars. Some of these men have yet to be held accountable. Some of these men could have helped in holding them accountable but have been quiet. And one suggested, a major funder, that we activists were guilty of cyberbullying in the Me Too movement. The Me Too activists were the ones that were guilty of cyberbullying. Their message, we don't believe the women or we don't care what they said, it doesn't matter, our loyalty is to our bros. Many male leaders have continued to be silent, or they've hired the men or protected them in other ways. So on the West Coast, both Pacelli and Shapiro have found safe harbor, even though they continue to say their accusers lied. Shapiro even now disowns activism as the vehicle for change, while Pacelli moved his activism to another welcoming organization. And the single-issue focus that Pacelli promoted was used to defend his role, when Marty Irby of Animal Wellness Action explained, it's important for people to know that we're focused on animal protection and we don't want to get sidetracked. To which I tweeted, how inconvenient it must be that fostering a hostile environment for women employees is actually an ethical issue, which led to immediately being blocked by Marty Irby on Twitter. Were these men predators? Was Harvey Weinstein and the many men named through Me Too predators? This term evokes the stalking behavior of carnivorous animals, but also unintentionally naturalizes human male sexually exploitative behavior while applying a negative meaning to actual predatory animals. Serial sexual exploiters are not acting as nature would have it, but in a socially constructed way, and they can and should change. The use of the term predator, just as with other forms of animalizing language, for instance, beast, often used about men of color, and animals for rapists and batterers, deflects through animality. So here we are, back again. Men are often animalized when they are in fact being their most deliberate. Acts of sexual aggression, attacks, harassment, and exploitation are not animal-like. Serial sexual exploiters are not acting as nature would have it, but in a socially constructed way, and they could change. They are not at all like carnivores in search of prey. Basically, they're refusing to act justly toward their victims, and they're making choices. To use the term predator for such male behavior applies a negative meaning to actual predatory animals, many of whom are threatened with extinction. So what do we do about animals? To say we aren't animals as an argument for respect and inclusion sanctions animality as a force for exclusion. Many of us posit resistance to a feminist ethics of care. Simone Weil suggested all we need to do is ask our neighbor, what are you going through? And listen to the answer. So, in conclusion, looking at how animals experience their lives, how they live within a racist patriarchy just as we do, is consistent with the feminist ethics of care. Asking, what are you going through? Seeing someone, not something. The ends do not justify the means, and identity is not constructed through anxiety and exceptionalism, but through connection. Here's a protest that's done by a feminist vegan artist. My body is mine. She's put this on a mural. This is a closed-down slaughterhouse in Brooklyn. And this one is in Brooklyn, too, on an image for a live poultry business. Veganism is part of the resistance, and I won't go into it now, but that's what the anti-Trump diet, now known as Protest Kitchen, discusses. So, putting together a barbecue, plus 374 man points. Cooking tofu sausages on it, minus 417 man points. What we need is more tofu sausages. and the feminist consciousness to interpret their meaning. Thank you. I'll see you at 3:30, I hope.